The Biden administration moved to oust several Trump holdovers, including Sean Spicer and Kellyanne Conway from military academy boards, while the former president himself issued a statement claiming that, let me see if I have this right, Confederate General Robert E. Lee would have won the war in Afghanistan. For more on this, it's time for a closer look. There's a simple truth about our history, which has somehow been muddied through decades of self-serving revisionism by racists and apologists for white supremacy, and that is that the Confederacy was a movement of anti-American traitors and slavers who tried to destroy this country. I can't believe that even has to be said, but apparently it does. I mean, there are people out there who don't even know what the Civil War was about, like, for example, the former president of the United States.
People don't realize, the Civil War, you think about it, why? People don't ask that question. But why was there the Civil War? Why could that one not have been worked out?
Yeah, people don't ask the question, why was there the Civil War? Just like we don't ask, how many sides does a triangle have? Or is a snake a reptile? Because we learned all that in grade school, at least those of us who weren't following our dad to construction sites to watch him yell at immigrants. What do you mean, don't ask that question? It was a white supremacist rebellion against the government, not a fight between my wife and her sister. What are they mad about? Don't ask. I mean, I know Donald Trump doesn't live in our reality, but it's still interesting to find out stuff about his reality. Like, I guess in his reality, the local libraries only have one book on the Civil War called What the Heck Was All This Nonsense About? Also, I like that he wants to know why could that not have been worked out? Yeah, why couldn't you get the top Union generals and the top Confederate generals in a room, stick Andy Cohen in the middle, and talk it down over some skinny margs? I mean, seriously, you don't have to be the chair of a college history department to know that the Confederacy and its leaders were evil. Hell, you just had to have a substitute teacher in high school who forgot the lesson plan and played Glory on Laserdisc while he put his head down on the desk and took a nap. Yeah, sure, all the other kids secretly passed notes and played games, but me, I was watching Total Glory Stan. You might say that for one magical year, I was deep in a glory hole. I'd prefer if you didn't. But come on, Freeman, Washington, Brower, yes, please. Plus, I like to pretend that Matthew Broderick's character was just like Ferris Bueller, and before every battle, the general would say, Colonel Shaw? Colonel Shaw? Unfortunately, part of the reason we have to keep stating that obvious fact about the evil of the Confederacy and the reality of the Civil War is that shortly after the end of the war and Reconstruction, a racist, revisionist lost cause movement rose up to cast the leaders of the Confederacy as a noble gentleman instead of the defeated traitors and white supremacists that they were. Nowadays, lots of us don't even learn about Reconstruction and the post-Civil War period in history class. I mean, I can't believe people are worried about critical race theory when my history textbook jumped from the Civil War to the Great Depression, and in between there was one page about William Howard Taft getting stuck in a bathtub. Now, I know that story is apocryphal and that it didn't even start to spread until decades later, but it's also super funny to me that someone went out of their way to make it up and spread it around about a dead guy. I mean, Taft was the only person in American history to ever serve as president and chief justice, and yet all anyone knows about him is a fake story that sounds like a plot line from Family Guy. Ah, Lois, it happened again. Get the jaws of life. Raymond? No! Peter! And that's why there was a giant statue of Robert E. Lee on a horse looming over the old capital of the Confederacy in Richmond for 130 years, because white supremacists and Confederacy apologists tried to recast him as some sort of noble hero, even though it was known at the time by actual Civil War heroes that Lee was a traitor who disgraced himself. Ulysses S. Grant said the cause Lee fought for was, I believe, one of the worst for which a people ever fought, and one for which there was the least excuse. And Grant's the guy who beat Lee. How the hell did Lee end up with a giant statue and not Grant? If anything, there should have been a giant statue in Richmond of Grant kicking Lee in the balls. Even better, it could be a clock that tolls on the hour. Not sure if 1 o'clock was the funniest of our options. Well, yesterday, finally, after 130 years, that wretched monument to an evil cause was finally taken down, with a crowd gathering to celebrate as Lee was hauled away.
The nation's largest Confederate monument just came down. The giant Robert E. Lee statue in Richmond, Virginia, which is 6 stories tall and weighs 12 tons, well, it was just removed. Shaq, what is the community saying about this? What was it like to watch this?
Stephanie, I'll tell you, there were celebrations, there were cheers, there were chants.
First of all, as a baseball fan, I love the crowd taunting him like he's a Yankees reliever in Fenway who just got pulled after coughing up 6 runs in the bottom of the 8th. There should have been an angry Sox fan there pouring beer on his head. Also, as someone who grew up going to Fenway, I can attest that Red Sox fans are unruly, drunk, and yet surprisingly knowledgeable about history. Hit the showers, Bobby, and then go take your medicine at Appomattox. And yeah, that's right. The Yankees are the new Mets in closer look punchlines. But don't worry. The Mets blew it in extra innings last night, so they're still the Mets. I don't follow the Mets scores. I just know what happened because as I was leaving last night, the entire crew was sitting in a circle sobbing and hugging each other and saying, "We don't deserve this," which, just between us, some of them do. Second, there's nothing more humiliating than being carried away on a horse in the air. When you're sitting astride a horse on the ground, you look like a noble hero, but when you're sitting on one in the sky getting lifted up by a crane, you look like a porta potty getting hauled away after Burning Man, or a guy who glued himself to his horse and now can't get out the front door. Ah, it happened again, Raymond. Anyone who loves America should be watching this scene and celebrating along with the crowd. A monument to a traitor who fought for an evil cause, the cause of slavery, white supremacy, and who tried to destroy the United States has finally been taken down. But you'll never guess who had a slightly different take on things.
Former President Donald Trump issued a statement calling the removal a, quote, complete desecration, and lamenting that Lee was not available to lead the United States in Afghanistan.
Trump said in a statement, quote, "If only we had Robert E. Lee to command our troops in Afghanistan, that disaster would have ended in a complete and total victory many years ago. What an embarrassment we are suffering because we don't have the genius of a Robert E. Lee."
First of all, Dingus, you're from Queens. It's pretty hard to remake yourself as a good old boy when you sound like a super in Astoria. You know where this apartment needs? Some freaking magnolias. Oh! Seriously, what do you mean it would have ended in victory if Lee was in charge? He lost. He's famous for losing, but yes. If only Robert E. Lee had been in charge in Afghanistan, then surely he would have said something inspirational like, "Is that a missile? All I have is a bayonet and I'm glued to my horse. Get me out of here." Trump also called it a beautiful piece of bronze sculpture. And if Trump ever calls anything beautiful, you know it's the opposite. I mean, look at his apartment. It looks like the set of a 80s game show called Gold Rush. Of course, I wouldn't recommend taking history lessons from a guy who, among other things, praised Nazis, sowed an insurrection where rioters carried the Confederate flag, thought Frederick Douglass was still alive, didn't know why the Civil War happened in the first place, and thought there were airports during the Revolutionary War.
The Continental Army suffered a bitter winter of Valley Forge, found glory across the waters of the Delaware, and seized victory from Cornwallis of Yorktown. Our army manned the airport. It ran the ramparts. It took over the airports. It did everything it had to do.
That's right. Who can forget the infamous Battle of LaGuardia, where Patrick Henry famously said, "Give me priority boarding or give me death." Here's why the peanuts are free now. You just have to pay for the peanuts. To this day, school children still take trips to the Buffalo Wild Wings in Terminal D, where Washington's army camped out during the winter. And we all remember the words of British General Charles Cornwallis, who upon surrendering said, "We just want to leave LaGuardia. Where is ground transportation? The signs are very confusing." This is the guy the Republican Party has made its leader, the guy they've lined up behind, a guy who sowed an insurrection to overthrow democracy, oversaw the preventable deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, and praised traitors and racists. That's why he and his loyalists need to be thoroughly banished from our institutions and shunned from our politics. And yesterday, the Biden administration took another small step toward accomplishing that goal.
Months into Joe Biden's presidency, his administration is still cleaning house as it relates to former Trump officials, with the director of the White House's Presidential Personnel Office sending letters to 18 people on 3 different government advisory boards asking them to resign.
Familiar names include White House counselor Kellyanne Conway to the Air Force Academy and former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer to the Naval Academy.
Why were there still any Trump holdovers anyway? That's like moving into a rent-controlled apartment the last guy died in and keeping all the expired whitefish in the refrigerator. And why was Kellyanne Conway on an Air Force advisory board? If she ever flew an F-16, or what she probably calls a F-17, I'm guessing it would end up in a ravine with her standing on the tarmac in a parachute, claiming it was a successful landing. The plane is on the ground. Do you not think the plane is on the ground? But my favorite part of this little episode was the reaction from former Trump press secretary Sean Spicer, a commander in the U.S. Naval Reserve, who apparently has his own show on Newsmax now. Spicer was outraged by the explanation for his removal given by current White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki. First, let's see Psaki's answer.
Is there any concern that because a lot of these appointees do go across administrations, that there is a risk of politicizing these traditionally non-controversial positions?
Well, I will let others evaluate whether they think Kellyanne Conway and Sean Spicer and others were qualified or not political to serve on these boards. But the president's qualification requirements are not your party registration. They are whether you're qualified to serve and whether you're aligned with the values of this administration.
Okay, you could agree or disagree, but seems perfectly calm, perfectly reasonable. Now let's check in on how Spicer's doing.
I'm announcing tonight for the first time that I will not be submitting my resignation, and I will be joining a lawsuit to fight this. Maybe it's because they want to inject liberal ideology like critical race theory into the curriculum, and they want to ensure there's no pushback and zero oversight. Each of us chooses how we're going to serve this country. I won't ever question how anyone chooses to do that. I won't question how you choose to do that, Jen. But don't you dare ever minimize or question my service to this nation. You got it?
And if you're wondering why it's so echoey, I shoot this show in a cave. Also, you're filing a lawsuit? Who are you going to get to represent you? Sean, I'm going to be late for the hearing. I was trimming my nose hair at the Cinnabon at LaGuardia. Yeah, at the Paul Revere ride. Yeah, it happened a few weeks ago. Who cares? It's Rudy. There's no statute of limitations on Crazy Rudy News, especially because Rudy doesn't even know what a statute of limitations is. A statute of limitations? I thought they took that down. A monument to a traitor who fought for slavery and white supremacy was finally torn down. Should have never been there in the first place. And yet there's a political movement in this country that to this day still reveres and apologizes for traitors who fought for an evil Confederacy. We need to make sure these people never get near power ever again, period.
You got it?
This has been A Closer Look. God's Love We Deliver cooks and brings over 2 million meals a year to men, women, and children living with HIV, AIDS, cancer, and other serious illnesses, and they need your help now more than ever. If you're watching this online, you can hit the donate button. Stay safe, get vaccinated. We love you.